All right, this is exciting. Jamal, great to see you. Welcome to the Leaders Who Care series.
Great to see you, Mark. Thanks for having me.
As I said, I love the tie, the handkerchief, looking good. Putting you
Thank
to shame, but looking good.
you. Thank you.
But it's great to have you here, and I'm excited that people can get to learn a bit more about you, and we can get some wisdom from you. So I'm putting the pressure on. We need some wisdom.
All right. All right.
So could you briefly, without giving your whole story initially, but briefly introduce yourself, who you are, your family, etc.?
For sure. For sure. Yeah. I'm William Jamal Miller, my whole name. I go by Jamal because I'm a third William in my family. My dad is junior, and his dad, of course, is senior. They changed my middle name. Instead of Harding, it's Jamal. So, yeah, I'm one of four boys. I'm the baby of the family, born and raised here in Sacramento, California, where I've grown up both personally, socially, and professionally. And married. My wife Tamika is from Oakland, California. She's a business owner there, has a nail spa there, and I have two daughters, Sky and Leah. They are 14 and 13, and ninth and seventh grade, respectively. In addition to school, they play sports, volleyball, and track, and all that good stuff. So, professionally, I'm Chief Administrative Officer at Mercy Medical Group, which is part of the Common Spirit of Health, Dignity Health family here on the West Coast. And I've been in this role since October of 2019, a large multi-specialty medical group based here in the greater Sacramento area. And just delighted to be a part of this dynamic group of providers who are drawn to serve compassionate care by way of our mission. And just excited to be able to have this conversation with you today.
Yeah, so am I. It's just I had to narrow down the questions. I actually had so many. I had to narrow down from 2 pages at least to one, and that's when I stopped halfway through the process. So here we go. Education-wise, you've got so many little interesting things you've done. Education-wise, you get your bachelor's psychology, master's healthcare admin. I get those. I'm interested to know about the Doctor of Humane Letters. Can you tell me about that?
Yes, yes, yes. Coincidentally, I was corresponding today with the Associate Dean, Dr. Stephanie Bolin at Western University of Health Sciences. And I was just sharing with her by way of email how time flies. In May 2016 is when I was conferred that honorary doctorate, albeit unearned. But if there was ever a bucket list, accolade, that was definitely one of them. It coincided with my time serving in Governor Jerry Brown's administration from 2013 through 2018, when I was leading California's Office of Health Equity within the State Department of Public Health. I was first ever appointed executive to that role and confirmed by the California State Senate in July of 2014. And we did some groundbreaking work that continues to have an impact to this day. And around that time, I was approaching probably almost 20 years in healthcare. And based on my track record up to that point in both private and public sector, and more than anything, the important public service work that was being done as deputy director of the California Office of Health Equity, Western University of Health Sciences extended the invitation for me to be the commencement speaker for their graduating class. And they surprised me shortly before arriving with the news that they would confer an honorary doctorate. So I was fortunate enough to have my parents join me during that particular trip, and a good close friend of mine, James Jordan, who actually works now in the Biden administration. And they joined. It was a great dynamic time in my life for a number of reasons, but kind of much needed. I was going through a divorce at that time, and it was just one of those recognitions that was far more than just professional or civic, but personally, it just was something that gave me some confidence, and understanding that there are people who are out there watching, who are inspired by the leadership, inspired by the career that I've had. And that's something that I pride myself in as far as how my career has evolved. It's not about me. It's about how can we help others, and how can we have a lasting, sustainable impact. And the last thing I'll say about that degree was it was awesome in that pre-COVID, of course, my daughters who were unable to make it, they were in class and they were in elementary school at the time, but they were able to watch it live online when I was speaking to that graduating class in Southern California. And I just really felt proud, as I want to live a life that provides inspiration. And my daughters who were, much younger at the time, is something that they'll always remember and cherish. And hopefully it inspires them to continue, down their path of greatness.
So they watched it with their classmates?
They did.
Talk about the best show and tell ever.
Right, it was cool. There's a picture I have on my phone of my youngest daughter, Leah, who at that time had to have been 7. There's a picture of her and the screen in the background with me giving the speech, and took a picture of her and her classmates. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, the bragging rights for the daughters too, right?
For sure.
That's my dad, man.
Mm-hmm.
No, way to go. That's fantastic. I'm going to play with the words here. We can use some humane letters sent around in the world right now, actually.
Absolutely. We need far more humanity by way of letters, conversations, connections, virtually and in person. Now that we're getting on the other side of COVID, these last 36 months or so have been very, very interesting. And the unique period we're in now, it just really requires us to see the humanity in one another. We've got to do so much better.
Yeah, absolutely. And we all want the same thing,
That's right.
It's pretty incredible. Well, switching a little bit, you've been in, I have to look at my notes to remember all the stuff you've been in, actually. I mean, data analysis, administration, obviously special projects, marketing and communications, community benefit, goes on and on. Certainly all invaluable, I would think, towards your leadership on diversity, equity, and inclusion from what you get from that, and now overall administration. Tell us a little bit about that journey and how it impacted your views of health equity, et cetera. And include in there, I really like the role of corporate reputation and thought leadership. So tell us a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I look back at my career, it'll be 24 years this June. Time definitely flies slowly.
Yeah, it does.
But I reflect on the circuitous nature sometimes. So I thought at the time that my career was taking, but really the functional diversity of, navigating the healthcare, landscape throughout the course of my almost 24 years has really served a purpose to allow me to get a vast array of experiences, to delve a bit more deeply in certain areas than others, but to have a certain level of familiarity and acumen with, our healthcare system on public and private sector sides that a lot of people don't necessarily have the benefit of drawing from. And it has been foundational across that, breadth and depth of experience when I think about the importance of diversity, inclusion, and equity. A lot of times I've seen the function of diversity, inclusion, and equity marginalized or made to be out to be an exceptional program that we set over here off to the side. Mm-hmm. But especially now, as equity, inclusion, and diversity is becoming far more mainstream, a lot more people outside of kind of the core community of practice or practitioners over the last 20 plus years who've been in this space, they've seen it all along. They've always known about the value proposition and the importance of diversity, inclusion, and equity broadly and deeply affecting all of corporate America in particular, or any organization. But now when I say mainstream, it's starting to be more broadly understood and appreciated in newer segments, of society, newer segments of corporate America. And now you're seeing it's far more prevalent to move beyond conversation to investing and marshaling all resources and assets that companies and organizations have to really move the strategies, the financial capital, the human capital, the
Right.
governance structures, how organizations serve customers and communities. That all now is starting to become extremely important as it pertains to including equity, inclusion, and diversity as a part of those efforts. And also, when we think about policies from a regulatory standpoint, from federal, state to local levels, it's starting to become more mainstream and polarizing for some, but most are really understanding and appreciating that if we're to get to a place of true equality and equity, not just within healthcare, but really more broadly across society, Western society, but around the world, we have to genuinely come back to appreciating and valuing the humanity in one another. And we also have to take the best of our resources and allocate them in the spaces of advancing equity, inclusion, and diversity. So the progression of my career has truly, it's been a blessing. And I didn't come to really start to be a health equity leader until I officially was appointed by Governor Brown. But if you fast forward now to being the chief, administrative officer within a large, multi-specialty medical group, foundational to what I do is still equity oriented, even though it's not in my title. When you think about my first role that I took going back to private sector after serving in the Brown administration, it was with Blue Shield of California. And I was able to put that hat on of being the director of corporate reputation and thought leadership. And core to that role was really, how could Blue Shield as a nonprofit health plan continue to demonstrate and position itself as a nonprofit health plan as one that cares about being a good corporate citizen, one that wants to show up uniquely different in how members of the Blue Shield family are served, how employees of the Blue Shield family are served. So my role, although not exclusive to my role, I had an important strategic opportunity to help build out the strategic framework for corporate reputation and thought leadership, kind of a newer buzzword title as part of our external affairs division at Blue Shield. And we did some great work to really identify what are the drivers to advance a meaningful corporate reputation, branding, and thought leadership agenda. And again, when I look across all of the different roles that I have, there's not a moment where I don't draw from those experiences, in my current role. And it's wonderful to be able to have that, that cadre of expertise and skill sets and experiences to draw from. So that really informs, one of the things that we talked about earlier, and as I was preparing for our conversation today, when I think about the last 24 years and you ask about kind of what's the why, what motivates me, what's the impetus for who I am and what I do, all of those experiences come to mind in helping me become more salty. The scripture that talks about, we are the salt of the earth, we are the light of the world. And when I think about, my life personally, professionally, civically, socially, I don't always consciously try to be this way. I'm just, I guess, naturally, I want to be that salt. I want to have an impact, to bring flavor, to bring a sense of preservation, and value wherever I am, and to be a light, that when people see me coming or they engage with me, that their saltiness, their light, will rub off on me and vice versa. And I think if we're more salty, we can make a world that is far more salty and better, caring for each other and being more valuable. So that's kind of my why as it pertains to the question that you asked about the array of experiences that I've had. And there's some frustrating, experiences along the way where I questioned, was I headed in the right direction? And I definitely know the answer to that now is yes, because it all works together as far as the direction and the path that I've been on in my life, even the things that didn't work out like I thought they should.
Well, there's generally a reason for everything, and it's sometimes a matter of how you handle it, right? And so many things you said there that I love, including no particular order. It doesn't have to be in the title to be it. It doesn't have to be in your title to be it,
Right.
and although there has to be intent for diversity, equity, and inclusion,
That's
but
right.
it doesn't mean that it's, well, what it does mean is everybody's involved in that.
That's right.
And that's so important, and everybody's got an equal opportunity for whatever there may be. And so I love the way you framed it, and it kind of leads to the next point I wanted to chat about, where organizations, companies are finally been realizing, it's why we trademarked the term leaders who care. They're finally realizing that if you the business in general and whatever it is, whether it's healthcare or manufacturing and whatnot, will do better if they do good, if they do have social impact. So
Yeah.
they'll get the best talent, they'll do better in business, etc. So what I'd like is if you can share one thing I learned. I remember reading a story once about how belonging is the heart and soul for people. That is the number one thing that fills people's hearts and souls. How do you create an environment, especially in the healthcare arena, how do you create an environment of belonging, both internally in your organization, meaning employees and patients, but also a healthcare organization wants to be creating belonging in the community as well, and caring in the community as well? How do you bring those values forward where you're making an impact like that, and you're also, as you said before, creating other leaders who care?
Yeah, absolutely. There's this spectrum that includes diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging. And, you can sequence those, as it pertains to diversity from a corporate standpoint. That was kind of the leading buzzword, but more than a buzzword, a principle of practice that some of the more progressive leading organizations, caught on to decades ago. And then over time, as more research is done, more authentic engagement and learning, how do you really institutionalize these practices? It progressed towards, inclusion. And it started to progress more towards what came up in the public health framework in context of health disparities or health equity, which is the antithesis to health disparities. And then the deepest sense of, if you have diversity, inclusion, equity, that should naturally equate to a sense of belonging. You have key shareholders, key stakeholders in any particular movement or organization. So whether it's the consumer or the patient, whether it's the provider of that care, whether it's a doctor or an advanced practice professional, or a provider or an allied health professional, or the service provider who might be the receptionist, or they might be the registration clerk, or the environmental services, technician, or the C-suite executive, or the board of governors, or directors or trustees who have that fiduciary responsibility for the organization. But there are a number of key stakeholders, in any given organization, movement, or process. So when it comes to belonging, when it comes to equity, the question is, to what extent does each cohort have a level of deep engagement and influence that for the most part is equal, that is equitable, that comes together behind a mission, a purpose, and moves forward, together to achieve those common goals, those common objectives, those common strategies. And, it sounds great, but to realize that it's very, very challenging, particularly within the context, in Western society in particular, but in different parts of the world. When you think about systemic racism, institutionalized racism and discrimination, and many of the barriers that have helped keep many people by different races, ethnicities, genders, sexual orientations, and class levels behind, marginalized, disenfranchised. So those are often the groups that are not only marginalized and left out, but oftentimes are rendered voiceless. So to be intentional about belonging means that not only do those powerful or influential stakeholders or shareholders in the process have a position at the table to influence it because of their resources or their positions. The other part of that equation is that their level of influence, their level of importance as key shareholders in the process are those who have oftentimes been marginalized, disenfranchised, and excluded from the process, from the decision-making process, from the resource allocation process. So the prototype of belonging not only brings all of those groups together, but especially those who are marginalized feel that they belong when the system is more reflective of them demographically.
Sure.
The system provides, resources that they oftentimes have provided when we think about taxing or any number of ways, the purchasing of services, like you genuinely have a stake and an interest in organizations that oftentimes exclude you. So the extent to which you're represented, you're involved, you see yourself, and it's done in a sustainable, meaningful, and an inclusive way, that functionally leads to a sense of belonging, to where you just genuinely feel like when you walk into the room, when you show up, that all of who you are is okay to be, that you don't feel left out, that you don't only bring a sense of diversity to the room, but yet your diversity is valued, you as a person, your value, your resources, your intellect, your abilities, your skill sets, your voice, it's all valued. So you have a sense of, I belong, I belong to this place. And unfortunately, we still have too many pockets of society who do not belong. And inherent to that, you have a lot of inequities, socioeconomic inequities, racial inequities, and especially in my industry in health and human services, lots of health inequities, health disparities that result from people not belonging to the various systems, organizations, and institutions that oftentimes govern our lives day in and day out. And when you don't feel like you belong, there's a cost to that. That is not only financial, but in mind, body, and even spirit.
Yeah, without a doubt. I remember having a conversation with somebody, and I'm sure we've all had this conversation, but it was somebody saying they had like 3 kids, and you say, "Are you going to have another kid?" And they would say, semi-tongue in cheek, "Well, I don't know how we're going to split the love up," type of deal. And and it's not a matter of splitting it up; it gets bigger, basically.
Yes.
And so there's that point where there's plenty to go around.
That's right.
And if somebody's insecure of their standing because other people are getting involved, they're missing the whole point. First of all, they're insecure, which is part of the problem. But they're missing the whole point of, don't you want to try different foods? Don't you want to hear different opinions? Shouldn't that something you should be cheering about to bring to the table? Versus if we're all exactly the same, how boring is that?
We're better. We're so much better for it. The House of Blues, I think their motto is unity and strength and diversity, I believe, or unity and diversity. But what you just said makes me think of, I was at equity conference that Policy Link started hosting a few years back. And I think Angela Glover Blackwell was the founder. She was still the president and CEO, major conference in LA. And I attended a session, and I think he's a former executive at Robert Wood Johnson. His name is Dwayne Proctor. And the conversation, of course, was about equity, health equity, but in particular, it was this notion that people feel that if you have equity, you have equality, you have justice, that someone has to lose in that equation. You're taking something away from me so that others can have. And the analogy that he used was spot on, and I use it to this day. And what he talked about is if you have a room full of people, and let's see you, Mark, in this room full of 10 people, you have a candle, everyone has a candle, but your candle is the only one that's lit. We were talking about light earlier. So you lean over to me, I'm on your left, and you light my candle. And then I lean over to the person on my right, I light their candle. That person lights her candle, and so on and so forth. And before you know it, all 10 of us have lit candles. What did Mark lose? In that situation, you lose nothing. But what do we gain? We gain a no longer dark room, but an extremely well lit room that benefits us all. We can see better, we can plan better, we can strategize better, we can take on the world together. And that's synonymous with what equity, justice, and equality is. And some people don't. I think some people innately understand that, but they're so entrenched in their insecurities and political postures against progressive or what more liberal ideologies are. But it's not political at all. It's human. It's that we are all created in a way that is in the image of God. We are the best of all of humanity. We all have a purpose, and that's something that again, it's soft, but it's so meaningful and so important. And we don't lose anything; we gain. And there are studies, even economically, that show
absolutely
that productivity is enhanced, and case studies that we've seen during COVID, where we see our interdependent dynamics can be, they can be adversely affected.
Well, we also have a new definition and understanding of what essential people mean.
Yes, yes, and not just in service to me, but in service to one another. How it affected our kids and their schooling and all facets of our lives. We are better together. And this is a message that we have to continue to talk about, be comfortable with it, but particularly in audiences that aren't having these kinds of conversations and applying the principles and the values of these conversations.
Yeah, I learned a lot from my grandparents, who, by the way, were from Kyiv, and my mom and aunt are from Kyiv.
Wow.
And so if there's anything got good out of this, which is horrendous, is that the world seems to be, a good part of the world seems to be coming together a little bit more and changing. But I used to, my grandfather used to take me for walks when I was a kid in Montreal, young, 5, 6, 7, whatever years old. And one day I just finally asked him, and I call him Zeta. I said, Zeta, how do you know all these people? And he said, I didn't know any of them. I smiled at them, and then they smiled back.
Right.
And then they started talking to me, and
how about that?
Back. and they all became friends, and it didn't matter. Nothing mattered. It was just
universal,
wonderful feeling.
Yes. Yes.
So, do you think, with that example, if you will, do you think there's been kind of like a quote unquote awakening of what really is important after all that we've gone through the last couple of years?
I definitely do. Albeit, incremental. It has really accelerated over the last 2 years, given COVID, the impact of COVID, and how it's disrupted all of our lives. To some extent, it's been kind of a collective trauma in that day in and day out there. And even now, for many, it's death and sickness every day. And that, for us individually and collectively, it wears on you. The psychological impact of having the mode of work, how you go about working, just disrupted overnight. And even if it was a kind of a seamless transition for some, when you lose the interpersonal dynamics of being in the same room with colleagues or other people, and it's all virtual, everything's digitized. I mean, those things affect us. Limited vitamin D exposure, you're not getting out as often. You have those dynamics. And then you couple that with the very powerful and influential dynamic around civil unrest, social injustices, racism. We think about the visualization of George Floyd being killed, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, you put all of that together over the last 24 months, and it's devastating, not just locally, but around the world. So we have this outpouring, in government, nationally and locally, in corporate America, of many corporations, many entities doing far more than talking, but investing, making long-term commitments and investments and making systemic and institutional changes that set some momentum forth.
Yeah,
But yet,
we just have to hope that we don't have short-term memories. And the good news, like you said, about we saw a lot of, terrible humanity things happen,
right.
but we were able to see it because we were home and we had time to actually see it.
Yeah.
It was a good thing, if you will, a bad thing, but a good
Yeah.
thing.
No, it
And
was good because some of the distractions, whether it was vacation or work or commutes,
right,
like we were at home, you're on your devices, or you're focused in, and that is the other side of it, as far as the blessing of, there is always purpose. Sometimes to get our attention, things literally have to be shut down, even if it's due to a public health crisis. So spending more time with each other as family,
yep,
having more conversations. And again, in lots of the commitments that are made, to change society, we have to sustain that. And it's a good thing, but we have a long way to go as far as, unpacking the toxicity and the realities of issues of racism, discrimination that are fundamental to, Western society, particularly America. So we have to make that long-term collective commitment,
yep,
private sectors, but also in government. There's a lot of interventions that have to take place to have transformational change at scale that we've only dreamed about for many years. One of my favorite quotations, but one of the lesser known quotations of Dr. King, is that morality cannot be legislated, but behavior can be regulated.
mm-hmm,
It's going to really take a combination of changes, particularly at the policy level, to foster equity, social justice, and civil rights, human rights. And those things coupled together over time, the browning and tanning of America, which is beautiful, and the opportunity for there to be greater, more meaningful representation from the C-suite, from the board, to the grassroots, from grassroots to treetops. I mean, we have a true opportunity before us to set something in motion that is lasting, but we've got to have that collective shared will. And my biggest concern, and you alluded to it, is there's a time, at least in my short, 46 years of living, it's certain things that get your attention more than others, as far as changing course and getting wisdom. And when it comes to death or sickness or a public health crisis or international catastrophes, natural disasters, they get our attention historically, I've seen, and they bring us together in ways that foster change and goodness and cause us to see the best of one another. And what's I've been challenged with over the last couple, 2, 3, 4 years, really, is that lack of wisdom, that when and attention getting in our lives, when these things happen, we still have a segment of society that fosters subjectivity, lies, hate, racism, discrimination, many of the isms, xenophobia. And it is disheartening.
yeah, no
And
kidding.
it's of great concern when people literally are dying, and the science proves that, okay, wearing a mask can't save your life. Being vaccinated can't save your life, but we can also agree to disagree without turning against each other. But we've entered kind of this different phase that there have been elements of it. It's not new per se, but I think the visibility of it by way of social media and journalism and so many other platforms, there's a lot of toxicity, and negativity that's out there that's of concern. And when there's a lack of this collective wisdom in society, efforts to divide us versus unite us. That's the part that is of great concern. So I'm far more optimistic with the good things that are happening. But these things over here are of great concern, that are antithetical to all the good that I believe that we're capable of accomplishing, not just in our country, but around the world.
Yeah, no doubt. Well said. You know, the kind of complete on this part. There's a reason we trademarked the term leaders who care, because it is really true. And you said there are studies that business can do way better
Right.
if they do good at the same time, and that's good
That's
for
right.
community and whatnot.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you another day about this whole movement that's begun now called the Unity Project, where it's do good, be kind, and we need more of that thinking and embracing diversity and
Right.
because it takes too much energy to hate, and it
Right.
does, you know, and it's a lot more fun and easier to love,
Right.
do good.
It's
And
healthier.
so yeah, so we definitely need to go down that track. So last thing, really quick, kind of talked about what we're grateful for to some degree. What are you most hopeful for this year?
This year, I am, our hope has been deferred to some extent when we think about getting on the other side of COVID. So I am really hopeful and truly believing that we are headed in the right direction as far as, the pandemic eventually becoming endemic and allowing us to, live a bit more freely and safely, and to get back to some of our norms, but also take some of the good that came out of such a challenging time for us around the world to enhance our lives moving forward. I think that to the extent that some silos have been broken, for us to learn how to work better together. And there are many examples, not just in healthcare, how we were able to do that, but in society at large, to where people are demonstrating that, as one of my mentors says, you can do well by doing good. And I'm just hopeful that those positive attributes, those values, us kind of going back to what we've gotten away from, I hope that that sustains itself and that we just don't get a short-term memory, get back to normal, distractions, and act like we didn't come out of 24 months of the most catastrophic kind of once in a lifetime experiences. So I'm optimistic about realizing health equity that is not only predicated on what healthcare delivery systems do, but what we do in the broader ecosystem. To what extent can we mitigate and eliminate racism and discrimination and the real effects of racism and discrimination, to the extent that they foster stress and anxiety, lots of toxicity that literally lends itself to disease and causes trauma, perpetuates trauma, and creates mental and behavioral health issues. I'm hopeful that moving forward, that when we think about access to good mental and behavioral health services for all people, but especially those who are suffering from severe mental illness and trauma, I am hopeful that we just normalize that it's okay to not be okay, and to make sure that we're making services and supports available for the greater good of society. So I'm an optimist, versus a pessimist. And my faith, always keeps my engine going, keeps my fuel tank full to keep moving forward, and to know that, as an individual leader, it's not just my role or responsibility, but it's our collective responsibility, not just as leaders, but just generally as people, as fathers in our community, as family members, as friends. We have a collective responsibility, social responsibility to each other that I'm hopeful will become infectious in a good way.
It will, and it's up to us to make that happen. We're all, there's sports teams are in a league, but the championship of that league is worthless if the league doesn't have value. So we're all on the same we're on teams in the same league.
Yes,
So keep caring, keep making a difference, and we'll be there with you, and we'll make it happen, man.
for sure. Well, thank you, man. This has been great. I'm honored to join you today, and I look forward to meeting you eventually in person.
What a thrill that'll be. For me. No, thanks. Yeah, you deserve to be on as a leader who cares, because you truly are, and I really appreciate it. And thanks for joining us.
No problem, Mark. Thank you.